Hello, welcome back to the Weaving Magic podcast. I am your host, Tara Webb.
And I'm your host, Alyssa Lilly.
And today we have a fabulous person here with us today. We have Nova Luna. And Nova Luna, we would like to ask you, as we ask every host, or I guess guest instead of host, because, we're the host, but you can host too. I got sidetracked. How do you weave magic in your daily life?
I don't weave as much magic into my life as it used to because my life has become kind of chaotic. But for me, it used to be just implementing a lot of mindfulness into everything, from like when I would make my cup of coffee, instead of just trying to rush through drinking the coffee, sitting there. Well, it's like an herbal coffee, but like I make sure that I take my time when I'm stirring it. I take the time to actually enjoy the flavors of it. I have a horrible habit, like so many of us, to just get up and immediately go to my phone. And so I've started forcing myself back into my original habit of, when I wake up, immediately going and reading a chapter or two of my book. So this way I can let myself actually properly wake up, instead of immediately being bombarded by like social media and this need for like, all of that like stimuli and stuff like that. And so for me, that's always like, mindfulness has always been an important aspect of my everyday existence as someone who's disabled and things like that, and just has a lot of other things. It's important for me to have a lot of mindfulness because I live in the South as a queer person, and that's always going to be stressful and terrifying and things. And so you have to find little ways to like kind of come down from it all. And so for me, it's little things like making sure to take deep breaths, and just simply spending time with my animals when I can, going for walks in nature, but not exactly safe in my area to do that. But still, it's the little things for me more than like the big things.
I love that. It is really about the little things. We talk about that a lot on here. That's a great way just to bring, magic. I feel like we have this envision of we have to be in this big ritual space, and it's it can be as you're drinking
like altar tables and like deities and all, and like these big fancy tools, and it's like the real magic comes from you, like those tools and things like that. Like the big fancy candles, those are just tools, but at the end of the day, the magic at the end of the day always comes from you. And that's one of those things, as someone who's been a practicing pagan for more than half my life, everyone's like, oh, I gotta get this and I gotta get that, and I'm like, no, you don't need any of it. I mean, it can help you if it feels better for connecting to your practice, but every person's magic is going to look different too. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to paganism, was the fact that, unlike Christianity and unlike Catholicism and things like that, where it was very like, this is how it has to be, and there's very little ability to like have individualism and to make the practice fit you, paganism it's so open and it's so free flowing, and no two practitioners are going to be the same, and no two ways that they practice their magic is going to be the same. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it, is 90% of my friends are some form of pagan, and we all practice completely different. And it's so beautiful to see those, like, and that acceptance too. It's not like, well, why are you doing it this way? Why can't you do it my way? And it's just, oh, that's really beautiful. And we share those ideas, and it's such a beautiful community. And so it's one of those things that I've always loved about it.
Yeah. And I really love, because I feel like with paganism, the way that you go about your practice is how you express your love and your connection, and just seeing
it's a love language.
Yes. And seeing how many different ways people can connect and inspire you to connect deeper. It's just, yes, I'm here for it.
It's such a beautiful thing, like seeing the different ways, and like picking up other people's, like the way they practice, and implementing it into yours and showing your things. And like, there's not a lot of gatekeeping with paganism like there is with video games, with all these other professions, cooking, art, everything else. Like paganism is very much, let me share my practice with you. I mean, obviously there are certain like sects under like paganism that are closed practices, but there's still so much of it that is open. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because people don't understand that paganism is the oldest religion out there. Most other religions derive from paganism or have pulled aspects from it. I mean, even like when we look at Greek mythology and things like that, that all still has its roots. It's still a form of paganism. And so it's one of those things that to me is just so beautiful, because despite how people have tried to eradicate us, I mean, if we know the history of St. Patrick's Day, that was a massive attempt to eradicate and erase and silence us. But despite all of the attempts by colonization and Catholicism and Christianity and all these other forces to completely get rid of paganism, it's never gone away. it might have, you know, gone into small little pockets, but it's always remained. And I think and a lot of people have a lot of issue with the fact that it's becoming more mainstream, but anything's going to go through waves where it's going to get popular and not popular. But the nice thing is, yes, it's creating some ignorances, but it's also creating a space where those of us who've been practicing for years can teach, and we can help others learn, and we can help those who maybe had the interest but were scared because it was so taboo, and now it's less taboo. I mean, you can go into any store and find crystals and things like that, which, yeah, a lot of them are not going to be the best quality, but again, it's still opening it up the door and making it so we can talk about something that for the long time we couldn't talk about. And I mean, not even that long ago, we were burned for. So, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
That and being able to safely express, this is how we love to worship or create this relationship with the divine energy, and however we view that, and we can accept each other in that. And there's a lot of ancestral wound healing in that, and feeling safe to be public about it.
And it's beautiful because it's such a deep, I mean, like, it's such an ancestral practice, and it's such a like, it has so much tradition and so much root in history, and it's also so accepting too, regardless of your color, creed, race, gender, whatever, you know, sex, any of it. None of that matters when you step into paganism. You are free to be who you are. And as a queer person who didn't have a safe space to be queer, and took so long to even come out as queer, because while my family is accepting to a degree, I wasn't exposed to anybody else who's queer, and paganism became that place that I was like, this place accepts me, and it encourages it too. I mean, it's a massive part of that sort of culture and that sort of belief system and things like that. I mean, so many practitioners are some form of queer, and I think that's one of the things that draws a lot of people to it. Is it's such an open and accepting practice. You don't have to worry about being condemned. We don't, you know, we depending on the sex that you practice, like if you practice Wicca, obviously you have the rule of 3 and things like that, but it's still just beautiful. And there's still parts that are misunderstood, like Satanism. Like, so many people think that Satanism is, oh, let's worship the devil, but that's not actually it. And true Satanism actually started during the when Catholicism and things like that was rising, and when they were sending out, like when they were trying to silence scientists, and they were killing scientists and leaving them in the middle of the road as a thing as a deterrent for other scientists. So the group of scientists who were alive at that time, some of the greatest minds of all time, got together and they created Satanism. And what they would do, the whole animal sacrifices thing, actually comes from, they would take goats who were like sick and things like that, and they would kill them and they would hang them on the doors to deter them, like the Templars and everything like that. But it became a way to to study science, but combat the whole, like, you know, science isn't real, and the whole fighting of the Catholicism and the Vatican trying to silence them. And now it's evolved into something different, but it's still so cool to see how things have evolved and like everything like that. Like, it's one of those things that I wish more people knew about these histories too, but a lot of it has been silenced and, you know, erased. And so it's one of those things, but it's just, I love it. Like, it's such a beautiful practice, and I've gotten so many people into it because they're just like, they've come from such deep religious trauma, and they're able to heal that through paganism. I was raised Christian and Catholic, and it was awful. Like, especially the Catholic side of it, because everyone's like, well, Christian and Catholic are the same thing. I'm like, technically they're under the same sect, yes, but they're practiced very differently. I was raised both. And Christians at least a little bit more accepting, depending on the form of Christianity, than Catholicism. Catholicism is, especially as an AFAB, like when my mom and my dad got divorced, my family, like the church just condemned her. The Catholic side, they were like, they called her like awful names and things like that. And it completely turned me away from it. And my mom, she was very much like, you can believe what you want to believe, just don't force your beliefs on me, and I won't force mine on you. So I was able to practice pretty young, but that religious trauma doesn't just go away. And I think that's one of the things too, why a lot of people have jumped from Christianity and Catholicism to paganism, because it has become, there's so many of us have such deep religious trauma, and it's pushing, the church is still so closed off, and they're so archaic, and they're still so anti-AFAB, anti-queer, anti-this, anti-that, anti-any sort of expressionism, individualism, that especially the younger generations, like the generations below us, they're like, screw this, we're done. We're not taking your bureaucracy and your misogyny and your patriarchy. Like, you can take it, you can shove it. Like, we're going to go somewhere that's accepting and lets us be us. And they don't realize that they're burying themselves with this, which at the end of the day is not exactly a bad thing, because so many of our problems come from, well, them. So, you know.
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at, I don't remember which mythology it came from, but the death of Jesus and the, you know, rising from the dead, and how that was actually a pagan story of a god. I don't remember which one, but you know,
many.
Yes, many. But
yeah, it's taken from many of our gods.
And then even just looking at how the Romans are still in charge of everything, because people tend to forget that, you know, the Catholic Church, it's the Roman Catholic Church. And something that Alyssa and I learned recently is that, at least the way I see it, is one reason that Muslims have been so hated and feared and like put this stigma on them is because of the fight, this huge war between the Catholics and the Muslims, which I guess weren't Muslims at that time, and how they barely won against them. And they're like, ooh, we need to do something about this. And so that's this huge hatred that's just gone on for so many years among
they vilify anyone who's challenged them, and in any sort of true way, they vilify them and they make them out to, I mean, look at indigenous cultures. Like, I have indigenous blood. I mean, I don't even have a connection to that because the people that I knew passed away, and because of the way that our country is and everything like that, it's one of those things that it's so hard. But I mean, you even look at, you know, indigenous cultures and the way that they've affected them. And because in indigenous cultures, in many, there's 5 recognized gender identities. They're matriarchal societies. They're very much focused on this connection to nature and to all things and the vibration of Gaia and the world and like the universe and everything. And it's so beautiful. And it's the thing with Christianity and Catholicism is they're so threatened by people who recognize that their power is within themselves, not with some, and like, I know people take issue with this, but like, not some sky daddy. And it's not like, and that's the thing is, like, people can believe what they want to believe. I will never shame someone for believing in Catholicism or Christianity, as long as they're not using that to try to remove the rights or the opinions of somebody else. Because that's the thing is, I know, like, one of my really good friends is a Christian, but he never pushes it on anybody. He firmly believes in everybody being able to exist as they are. It's the people who use it to condemn and to control and to silence and eradicate and things like that. And it's just like, these are beautiful cultures that if you would just take the time to learn from them, you could learn, like, they could learn so much about acceptance and peace. And it's just, I could never imagine going through life with that much hatred and vitriol in my heart. Like, I couldn't picture looking at somebody and seeing like a queer couple genuinely happy and being like, no, they can't have that. Because what? Because you're miserable with your own life? Or because some book told you that was written and rewritten by men? How many thousand? Especially, I will never understand AFABs who follow it so heavily, because it's like most of that text portrays you as a subservient human, not even human.
A less than, yeah.
And it's like, that to me was the thing that I never could get behind as an AFAB. Like, I might no longer be woman identifying, but I am still very much woman perceived, and I am still very much affected by those traumas and those stories and that journey and the way that the world perceives us. And that's the biggest thing for me that pushed me away from it. Was when you look at paganism, it's very matriarchal. It's very much women are power. AFABs are power. There is power in your cycle. There is power in your uterus. There is power in your womb. There is power in your voice. There is power in you. And that's such a beautiful thing, but it also encourages that balance between the divine feminine and the divine masculine, rather than just, let's only embrace the feminine. Let's only embrace this. It's no, yin and yang. You have to embrace all aspects of self in order to be whole. If you only embrace one side, then you are doing a disservice to yourself and you're not connecting, because the world is full of masculine and feminine energy. And so it's one of those things that I think a lot of people get hung up to, because we've so heavily gendered masculine with man and feminine with female and woman. And it's like, masculine is an energy, feminine is an energy. It doesn't matter about your assigned sex. It doesn't matter about your gender identity. We all have masculine and feminine energy within us, but we've become so disconnected from that. And that's even a lot of indigenous cultures have, because of colonization. A lot of them have lost sight of that balance, and it's hard to watch, because so much of what they were rooted in, so much of their culture and so much of their tradition and their belief system is rooted in that balance between the masculine and the feminine and the whole self and our whole ethos and like the connection to every aspect of us. And so it's one of those things that it's just like, I wish more people would stop so heavily associating masculine and man and feminine and female, especially cishet men. They're so scared of anything feminine. They're like, oh no, I can't. And it's like, if you would embrace your feminine side, your divine feminine side, you could connect to yourself on a level that you could open up such a world to yourself. You wouldn't be so closed off. You wouldn't have a lot of this anger and this pent up emotions and things like that. And you would be able to express a beautiful side of yourself. And but again, it's the patriarchal, misogynistic, society that we're slowly getting away from who we were. Now we're kind of going backwards, but
Steps forward, 3 steps back. I think on the flip side of that too is it's not even closing off one side or the other. It's only building a relationship to the toxic version of that energy, right?
Oh yeah. And there is entirely too much built up of the toxic masculinity. I mean, so many men they're so scared of expressing an emotion. They see, and studies have actually proven this, they see AFABs as objects. Like they literally, and even a lot of AFABs do, because misogyny runs so deep and because the patriarchy has like affected us on such a deep level, but they literally put like AFABs and AMABs in a room, and they had them look at like a lamp, a chair, and a human, and like different objects. And that most of the AFABs to some degree would have a change in their brain, and it would register that they would see the human, for the most part, as a human, not always, because again, patriarchy, but AMABs across the board, every single time saw an AFAB no different than they saw a lamp or a chair or a door or anything as an inanimate object. And that's one of the most disconcerting things to ever come out when it comes to like the way that toxic masculinity has affected our very core, because it even affects a lot of AFABs. And it's just like, they genuinely do not see AFABs as anything other than a place to reproduce, a place to, and then to just be used and discarded. And to be there to like take care of them and like do all the things. And it's just like, I love when you actually get to see AMABs who are fighting that, and it's beautiful to see AMABs who are in touch with their feelings and who don't see, for example, being a parent as as a job. Like they're like, oh, I got to babysit my kids this weekend. It's like, they're your kids too. Babysit? What do you mean babysit? I'm giving my partner the day off. Day off? You should be helping your partner every single day. Like, I'm like, what? No, like and that's the thing, but that's where that misogyny, that toxic masculinity has just woven, and so many people just accept it. And it's like, no, we can do better than this. We can have better. We should be commanding and demanding better, and I think that's the hard thing, is expecting that and wanting that.
So I'm curious, as a genderqueer person, how has it been building your relationship with the masculine and feminine energy?
So for me, I always knew I was some form of queer. I always knew. I always knew that I was, and I always knew that I wasn't aligned to my assigned sex at birth. But growing up in the time that I grew up in, where we didn't have access to the internet the ways in which we do, we didn't have access to the resources that we do, I was always labeled as the tomboy because it was the closest term that we had.
I relate to this so much. Continue.
You know? And like my mom would sit there and she'd put me in those frilly little dresses and the shoes, and 10 minutes later I'd be outside up in a freaking tree and she'd be like, "Get down here," and I'm like, "No, don't make me.
Let me be free."
Yeah. And like I didn't mind wearing dresses, but it was the fact that it was like it was expected of me. It was the fact that I was expected to be girly and feminine and like pink and like frills and all of these things. And it was the way that society treated me, even from a young age, as an AFAB, as what was supposed to be a woman. And I didn't like that. And I never felt an alignment, 100% alignment to that. So I went to the tomboy side. And that to me felt, it still didn't feel 100%. It felt more like home, but still not like home. And so for a while, I started embracing the tomboy side, and then societal expectations took over. And I was like, okay, well, let me try to go back to the feminine side. And I kept trying to force myself into this box and into that box and this box and this box and this box. And I was like, I don't fit these boxes. Why isn't there a box that's made for me? And then finally, when I was 31, I was like, screw the boxes. I'm gonna just make my own box. Like, why am I trying to fit this person's box and that person's box when they haven't walked my shoes? They're not experiencing life the way that I've experienced life. They're not living in this body. They're not living with the things that I live with. They're not experiencing what I experience. They're not having to go through what I go through. Why am I trying to fit their expectations and their boxes? They have their own box. And their box is cool and it's good for them. But I'm gonna make my box me. And I started connecting with the divine masculine, the divine feminine. Probably, I would say I started this journey, I would say probably about like 10 years ago, but especially when I escaped my abusive ex-husband. That was like the thing that really set me on the path, because I was like, I can't keep putting myself into this toxic situation and that toxic situation because I'm not respecting who I am. I don't even know who I am because I've spent so much of my, especially as an autistic, I've spent so much of my life mimicking other people. And so I was like, I have to figure out who I am. And my ex-husband broke me in ways that no human will ever be able to break me. And I lost myself in that relationship. But instead of letting that completely consume me, what I did was, when I came out of that, I was like, okay, you know what? Since I don't know who I am anymore, and I've stripped away every aspect of it, like he stripped away everything, let's actually figure out who I am without these expectations, without other people, without the opinions and things like that. And so for the last 5 years, since I escaped them, because I escaped in 2017, since I escaped, I have been on this journey of just sitting with myself and asking myself, who are you? Who are you really? Like, in your core, what makes Luna Luna? Does this actually make you happy, or did you only like this because this person likes this? Did you only like this because society expects you to like this? And I think that's one of the hardest things for anybody, regardless of whether you're questioning your gender identity, regardless of whether you're questioning your sexuality, regardless of whether or not you've been in an abusive relationship or you have mental health or disabilities. We all reach some point where we question everything. And I think the hardest thing for a lot of people is that shadow work. And that was the thing. I sat with myself for 3 years straight, and I just sat and I was constantly, why am I having this emotion? What is the root cause of this? Because this emotion is valid, but as somebody who also has bipolar, and my emotions were always, well, it's just because you're bipolar. I was never allowed to have my own emotions, and so for the longest time I never got to accept my emotions. So when I would have an emotion, instead of punishing myself and shaming myself for having that emotion, I'd be like, okay, this is a valid emotion, this is a valid reaction, but why are you having this? What is the actual cause? Because that you're not that upset. You're not upset for that reason. There's a different reason. And so I started sitting with myself, and then I would find myself starting to fall into my own patterns. Why are you falling back into that? And I just found that as I sat with myself and I did the introspection, I was like, I don't really feel masculine. I don't really feel male, and I don't really feel female. Some days I feel more one than the other. Some days I feel neither. Some days I feel a mix. Some days I feel something else entirely. And that was such a beautiful aha moment. It was, for the first time in my life, I finally had an answer to who I was. And what I had been feeling for years, I just didn't have the language for. And I still remember when I like, for the weeks leading up to me actually like looking up non-binary and trans, and I didn't even come out as trans first, I came out as just non-binary. But when I looked up the term, I remember I was talking to one of my friends and I was like, I don't think I'm a woman, but I'm not a man. I mean, I do tend to prefer more masculine leaning things, or what society deems as more masculine, more male. But I'm like, I'm not a man either. I would prefer to have a male perceived body, but not male perceived experiences, because I am still so incredibly grateful for my experiences as an AFAB, because I have a level of empathy and compassion and understanding that a lot of AMABs are incapable of having because of their inherent privilege. But it was like, for the first time, I finally was like, this makes sense. I know who I am. I mean, I still have a very tumultuous relationship with my body, because it is still very much not the correct meat suit, as I always refer to. I'm like, my meat suit might be wrong, but I wouldn't change my experiences, even the bad ones, because it's made me who I am. And it took me a long time to come to the conclusion and come to this place of like understanding. And I'm still growing in it, because it took me, I only started identifying as both trans and non-binary probably within the last year and a half, because I didn't feel like I had a right to identify as trans, even though anything other than cis, even if you feel like 2% less than alignment as your assigned sex. So if you are assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, and you feel 98% female or 98% male, but there's that 2% where you don't feel alignment, you could technically identify as trans, because it's anything other than 100% alignment to your assigned sex at birth. But I didn't feel I had a right to that, because in the beginning I was still fighting and I was still trying to subscribe to these ideas and the societal expectations. And then as I sat with myself more, I was like, I mean, I would love to get top surgery, and I would love to do like low dose hormones just to like androgenize my features a little bit more. But in the beginning, I didn't feel like I had a right to it, because we also have this idea that if you're trans, you have to transition. And it's like, it's such an archaic belief system. And it's like, no, if you don't feel even the slightest bit of light, if there's even a little bit where you don't feel alignment to your assigned sex, you can identify as trans. There's no right or wrong way to be trans. There's no right or wrong way to be non-binary. And I feel like that's a hard thing for a lot of people, because when we see non-binary, we expect non-binary, we expect perfect androgyny. And if you're more feminine leaning, what society deems as more feminine, or what your society deems as more masculine, it's really hard to come to terms with that. And so and I fought that, because I'm still fighting those, and so I'm still fighting. There's still plenty of days where I'm like, I would love to wear skirts and dresses and things like that, but I know that society will automatically read me as woman, and woman perceived, and I'm like, and there's nothing wrong with being a woman, it's just not me. And so it's hard, because there's still plenty of days where I fight both. And I actually originally came out as non-binary and gender fluid, because I was still trying to fit those binary expectations. And I feel like a lot of people also think that non-binary is just a third gender. But I have the biggest pet peeve with people saying girls, gays, and they. It is, or like guys, like I like guys, or like gays, gals, and non-binary, because that's fine. I just hate the girls, gays, and theys, or when they're like, oh, hey, fellow days. And it's like, because it's like not every non-binary person uses they, them pronouns, but it also perpetuates this idea that we're a third gender. And it's like, we're not. No two non-binary people are the same. No two are going to be existing the same. They're not going to perceive it the same way. Like the way I experience my non-binary is going to, like, me as a non-binary person is going to be very different than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is, again, it's that society, and it's hard to like balance yourself, because you're like, I don't want to do this.
And I love how you've given yourself permission to shift and change and flow. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what I was. So I was a tomboy, and then I was gender fluid, and then I knew I was gender queer, and you've allowed yourself that space to grow and give yourself permission. You know what? I am non-binary. You know what? I am genderqueer. I don't fit these boxes, and that's okay. And even changing how you fit those boxes over time as you grow and peel back those layers and figure out who you are.
That's one of the things, because like obviously you know my channel and things like that. Like a lot of what I do is queer education, and I have a lot of young queers who come into my channel and will come into my lives and they'll ask me, and they'll like ask questions in the Q&A and be like, hey, can I identify as this? Even though you said, I was like, here's the thing. I was like, remember, everything is a journey. your sexuality, your gender identity, your identity, every aspect of you is a journey.
Your human experience.
Yeah, I was like, if you try, like, if you find, like, say right now, you come out and you pick the name River, and that name feels great to you, and you identify as a trans man, but then 5 years from now, the name River doesn't fit you anymore. You want to change it to Rowan, and you realize you're not actually a trans man, you're just a trans person. That is perfectly valid, and I'm like, we have to escape this idea that once we get to a certain point, we're done learning, we're done growing. I mean, it's also the thing that I always tell people is like, you lose your power when you stop focusing on growth and knowledge. When you think, okay, this is it, I'm done, I've achieved all of that I can achieve in life. It's also, we're raised in a society where everything is like these boxes we have to tick. Get married, have the kids, have the house, have the perfect car, have the perfect lawn, And so many people are so focused on ticking those boxes rather than experiencing the experiences. And then they're 50 plus years old or like 60 years old, 70 years old on their deathbed. And they're just like, what the fuck did I do with my life? And it's like, we are so focused on being what society expects us to be that we don't allow ourselves to enjoy each experience and to explore who we are. And that was I've always bucked tradition. I've always fought authority, which was really hard when I was like, going in the military, kind of challenging. They don't like individualism, especially in the Navy. They're like, no, none of that. You can't have that. I'm like,
I didn't know you were in the military.
I was, but I actually got discharged during basic because I ankle snapped over a curve. I was also assaulted before I left, and that, like, I ended up having, when you're going, and the Navy focuses more on mental rather than physical, and so I was not in the best place mentally because I, like, literally 2 weeks before I left, I had been assaulted, like violently assaulted, and I hadn't told anybody. No one knew. And then I went into the military and I went into something very stressful, and it did not end well for me. But it was I worked my entire life for the military, but it was one of those things that it was just like, I've always bucked tradition. I've always fought authority and things like that. I've always been like this, especially being autistic. I've always been able to like kind of flip from group to group, even though like I don't understand the social cues. I've learned how to mimic people really well. But it was one of those things that it was just like, I never did good with authority. And I tried to force myself to fit in these boxes, but I also, as an autistic, I never understood the point of the boxes. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, why?
Make it make sense.
Yeah, like, especially when people do things that don't make them. I mean, and I still do it because of masking and things like that, but I'm like, why are you doing something if it makes you that miserable? Like, as an autistic, I just never understood why people would do things that like made them so angry and like so unhappy. And I'm like, if you don't like this, why are you doing it? And then it became ingrained in me, and then I started doing it, and I was like, wait, why am I doing this? What is this? And that was like part of that epiphany moment. Like, when I escaped my husband, it was like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through these? And even now, like, for the first time in a long time, I'm in a relationship with an AFAB, and like, even the other past relationships, I still held them at an arm's length, and this one I'm going full force in, and I'm like embracing it. And I'm like, I'm unapologetic in that, but I'm still like, I live in the South. We live in Florida. Like, both of us live in Florida, which, if you know anything about that, we have the Don't Say Gay bill and things like that. And there's a lot of anti-trans bills, and it's a very scary, especially like where I live, like where she lives, it's a little bit safer. Where I live, it's very, very dangerous. Like, it's very dangerous. Like, I walk out foot of my house, I almost got kidnapped like several months ago. Like, that's how, and so it's like, but I'm sick and tired of hiding and not embracing who I am because of society. And so that's been the big thing for me since I escaped my cousin. I was like, no more doing things because society expects me to do things. I'm going to do things that make me happy. It's scary, but I can't keep experiencing my life through somebody else's lens and somebody else's wants and needs and desires for me. I have to experience my life through what I want and what I need and what is best for me, not what my mom wants for me or what this person wants for me or that person or what they expect from me, or and I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of us, is getting to live our life for ourselves.
And even knowing what that is, and especially with so many of us having past trauma, who are we without this trauma? Who are we without these expectations? I have no fucking clue.
Right? Oh yeah, no, and that's the thing. I still don't know who I am outside of a lot of my trauma, because so much of my formidable years was spent in really traumatic situations. I mean, I didn't actually I've never been able to exist in my age at my point in a safe space. Even now where I live, like I still don't have a safe space. And I was telling one of my now kind of former friends, I was like, you at least have a safe space that you're in right now. I was like, I've never had a safe space. I've never had a space where I felt safe. Every moment of my life, I have had to worry about the roof over my head, the people living in my house, everything. I've never known safety. I was like, you don't know what that's like to go 30, I'm almost 34, and to go almost 34 years and I've never known a moment of safety in my life. I'm constantly worrying about everything. And they're like, well, I go through things, and I'm like, this is not the comparison Olympics. This is not the oppression Olympics, and I will never compare. But at the end of the day, what you go through, first of all, you're an AMAB. And I don't seek to take away from AMAB experiences, but AFABs, we have generational trauma. I was like, from the moment I'm born, even after I die, I am sexualized. I was like, do you understand that the first time I was assaulted, I was 2. I was 2 years old. And he was like, or they were like, well, I was like, no. I was like, you don't understand. That didn't just stop when I was 2. I was like, I have been assaulted more times than you could count on your hands and feet, and my hands and feet. I was like, you don't understand that trauma. That is not something you will yes, you may have gone through trauma, but the trauma that you endure, I was like, AFABs, we didn't get the right to divorce our husbands until the last several years. We didn't get the right to have access to bank account. I mean, there's still plenty of countries where AFABs cannot. There's still cultures where they tie a red scarf on a woman, and then men come out of the streets and they grab her and they throw her in a car and they own her. I was like, you will never have to deal with that. As a male perceived person, you might not be male aligned, but you are a male perceived person. That is something that is a trauma you will never have to endure. I was like, so for you to try to compare your experiences to mine and to try to invalidate my experiences, it's not okay. And a lot of times when AFABs talk about our experiences, AFABs go, well, women do this too, well, women do this too, well, AFABs do this too. And it's like, the percentage of AFABs that do these things are significantly less. Your problem is still with fellow men. Your problem is still with fellow AMABs. But it's hard to process all of that trauma, and it's hard to process things when you've never had that safe space. Mm-hmm. And like, you've seen my room on my lives and things like that. My room is very much like a sanctuary. And
I love it. I love your background in your room.
Yeah, like you can see too, like there's like all my little lights and like everything like that, because for me, it's the only safe space that I have. It's like, I spend 90% of my time, I'm a disabled person who's bedridden a lot of days, and so I spent a lot of time in here, and I needed to make sure that it was a space that I could feel safe in, and I could come down from the chaos of the world, but also my own world. I mean, everyone talks about the chaos of the outer world, but it's like, I have a lot of chaos in my own world that I have to process. And so I made this space. It was really important to me when I escaped my ex-husband to ensure that this space was safe, because and it's still not safe, but it's safer. I have locks on my doors and things like that, and I can close off the world when I need to, and I can just put my music on, and I have like my games and my books and stuff. But it's such a thing when you're trying to process your trauma, even when you're still experiencing trauma. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand too, is how difficult it is to heal from and process trauma while you're still enduring trauma. And that's one of the things that like my best friend, my soul sister, and I, we talk about a lot, because she finally got out of her situation, and she's finally at a point where she can process it. And she's like, I can finally really process my trauma. I'm like, yeah, because you're not constantly being bombarded by it. And it's an important thing for so many of us. But when you're disabled, your options are very limited, especially in this country, for any sort of like escape. So, because there's not programs here for us. So.
And I'm curious what you would say for those who are maybe, AFABs who are really happy in a marriage, right? And they just kind of wonder, it's like, but I'm happy. Why should I dive in? Why should I ask questions about myself when I'm happy in my relationship? I'm happy being married. I'm happy being a mother. But still, I wonder, right? What would you say to that?
See, for me, I think all of us should question. Every single person should question, because when we just accept ourselves, even happiness, there's still, even when we're happy, we can understand why we're so happy. Because I think too, a part of the problem too is when we talk about feminism, I have such issue with feminists who were like, who shame stay-at-home moms, who shame moms, who like women who are okay with like, you know, cooking and cleaning for their husbands and things like that. And it's like, if you're a true feminist, you should, it's giving AFABs the right, and women, AFABs and women, the right to be what they feel was right for them. You don't get to dictate what feels right for them. And I feel like we should always be questioning, because so many of us, we get ourselves stuck in this place of complacency. And we go, well, okay, well, I've achieved what life has told me to achieve. I'm good. But it's like, you can always have more, you know? And a lot of times I think too, some of us, we think we're happy because that's what society has told us. And then when we question, we're like, okay, maybe I'm not as happy. And I feel like a lot of people too, they're so scared of communication because society has vilified communication on such a deep level, especially when it's like between an AFAB and AMAB in a cis like marriage. It's very much, you know, if an AFAB is communicating any sort of emotions, or like, I need your help with this, or hey, you know, I'm happy with the relationship, but maybe we could do more date nights. Maybe you could help me out around the house more. Maybe we could do this. You know, maybe we could save up for this. It's the expectation that the AMAB is supposed to be, no, you can't do this. Me man, you woman, me control. You know, and I feel like so many people have bought into that. And it's beautiful when we're able to break out of that. We're able to be like, I'm happy, but I could be happier. You know, and I'm happy where I am, but also, am I doing stuff for myself? Am I embracing the things that, like, am I making sure to also set aside time for myself? Like, because we also, when like there's such beauty and joy and so much like just in being a mother and things like that, you know, like it's such a rewarding, fulfilling thing. Like, I might not want children, but I do see the beauty in and things like that. And it's beautiful, but it's also, I think a lot of times, because it's such a beautiful experience, so many mothers feel guilty when they want to take time for themselves. And I feel like that's a really hard thing, is to tell yourself it's okay to set aside an hour once a week where you close the kids off, you set them up with like whatever, you know, you want to set them up with, you go in, you take yourself a nice long hot bath, and self-care. I mean, anybody, men, AFABs, AMABs, you know, cis, het, regardless of your race, creed, color, you know, anything, gender identity, sex, we all struggle with self-care because we are raised in this hustle, hustle, hustle. If you're not producing or reproducing, then you are not contributing. And a lot of times it's hard because, and we feel so guilty and we feel so ashamed when we're like, I'm going to take 5 minutes for myself. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to just put some headphones in and like set my kids up with this, you know? And I think it's a beautiful thing to sit there and ask yourself, can I have more? But it's also just a beautiful thing to be like, I'm happy and I enjoy this. Let me talk about why I'm so happy, you know? And I feel like I love gratefulness exercises, not just like because I obviously don't celebrate Thanksgiving. I call it Friendsgiving, and like it's really more about just like bringing my friends together and like having really good food. And we'll actually talk about like the impacts on the world and things like that. We don't just like sit there and like, but I feel like one of the most powerful practices that anyone can have is, first thing when you wake up, say 3 things you're grateful for. First thing before you go to bed, or last thing before you go to bed, 3 things you're grateful for, and try to change it up, and not just, you know, and also, especially like, so in the morning, talk about like things outside of you. At night, talk about your body and like things within you that you're grateful for. Because I feel like that's also an important thing, because so many of us have such a tumultuous relationship with our bodies, especially AFABs. We have a very messed up relationship with our bodies because society and things like that. Like, when you're a trans person, people have these expectations. When you're AFAB and you're a mom and you've had kids and your body might not look the way that society expects, it can create this thing. And, you know, and so that's why I always tell people, like, in the mornings, pick, you know, either something outside of you, and then in the afternoons, pick 3 things you're grateful for about you. I love my eyes. I love, my smile. I'm so grateful for my smile and like for the light that it radiates and things like that. And I feel like that's such an important practice because we get so caught up in hating on ourselves because of society. And I struggle a lot with it because of being a trans person and having this need to not be right. And so it's one of those things that I constantly will sit there and I'm like, no. And I will force myself to sit there in front of my mirror, naked as a jaybird and be like, were you like this? And I'm like, and I don't, and it's hard. And I always tell them, like, this is not going to be easy to sit there and do these things, but it's also a necessary experience.
Mm.
And I think it's such a beautiful experience when you can fight these expectations of society and just connect to you and to what you are and where you are right now. And so I think it's one of those things that it's just, we should always be questioning everything and understanding why we're happy, why we're sad, why we're angry, and then seeking out those experiences and seeking out experiences that make us happy. And a lot of times we lose track of the things that make us happy. I'm like, find 15 minutes a week to do something creative. Don't try to be perfect at it. Don't try to control it. Sit and write. I love intuitive journaling too. I think intuitive journaling is one of the most fantastic things, and I tell every person to do it. And everyone's like, well, what is it? And I'm like, start writing about the weather. Write about your day. Write about anything. And then as you do this practice more, you'll find that as you get into it more, instead of just writing about the weather or your favorite color, you'll start to write about the things that are actually going on in your head. And I feel like that's such another like really important practice. And like set aside 1 hour a week where you just do an intuitive journaling session and you start writing about whatever, any topic, pick a topic, random topic. And then the more you do it, the more that you'll actually start to release things. And next thing you know, you're pouring out all of these things that you didn't even know you had inside of you. And it'll connect you. And it's a really great shadow work exercise. It's a really great intuitive exercise. It's an exercise that I love and I embrace and I use quite frequently. Because especially when I feel myself being bogged down by all these things, and I'm like, the other thing you can do is I like to type it because what I do is I keep a copy just to remind myself where I've come in my life and where I've been. But I also burn a copy, and then I kind of like in the ashes and in the smoke and everything, I release it. And I think that's also a really beautiful experience is to still keep a hard copy of it so you can look back. When you're 6 months from now, when you think you're like failing and things like that, you look back at that piece and you're like, wait, I was there and now I'm here. That's awesome. I've made, because we don't see our progress. We so rarely see what we do. And so it's also another great thing is to have friends write you letters about the things about you that they love. Because we're always our harshest critics. Yet we would never, the way we speak to ourselves, we would never speak to of another person. And we would be very upset with our friends if they spoke to that. And we're so often seeing ourselves through these warped perceived lenses of society and like family and like people who've hurt us and trauma that we lose sight of who we are. And so I think it's also a beautiful thing to have like your friends write you letters and just tell you the things they love about you. So when you're in that really bad headspace and you're in that like, I don't love myself space, you can open up those letters and be like, oh, wait, there's plenty to love, And so to me, it's all about cultivating these experiences and preparing ourselves because you can't be positive all the time. This whole toxic positivity culture is so destructive. And so I like to prepare because someone's like, oh, you're gonna manifest negativity. And I'm like, no, negativity is going to happen. Bad experiences are going to happen. Life is always going to challenge you, especially when you're working with yourself. Your ego is always going to, when it feels you breaking out of these bad habits and things, it's going to try to force you back into that safe zone. So you have to be ready for it. There's never going to be a perfect life, a perfect moment. Now, nothing's ever going to be truly perfect. So I'd rather anticipate those moments of struggle and have tools available and ready to go rather than getting to that moment of struggle and then being like, because they're so focused on the positive vibes, good vibes only, that I'm now screwed. I have no preparation and I'm just sitting here in like a ball of darkness, just like I can't find my way out.
Yeah, it's really about riding those waves, right? We're going to have those waves where we're way up here and then we're going to have our low waves. And that's just as valid, right? We got to feel and move through the emotion. And I love a lot of the practices that you just shared. So I think for our Magic Weaver listening, our challenge for this week will be, what do you think, Tara, the intuitive writing?
I think that'd be a really good one.
Spending 15 minutes a week or?
Yeah, let's start with a week.
That was very
Yeah, let's do 15 minutes a week of just
so good.
intuitive writing. Don't filter yourself. You don't have to have a plan on what you're writing. You can write a story, you can write what you're feeling, you can write your grocery list, just write for 15 minutes a day. Just let whatever come up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we'll see you on the
That's
next
one of the
one.
things that I love.
Sorry.
That's one of the things I love too. Like, is I think intuitive writing is like such an important tool for so many people, because it's just like, but we also like, I love the fact too that you were like, don't filter yourself, because so many people, we want to be perfect at it. It's like there's no right or wrong way to do intuitive writing. It's just do what feels right to you.
Yep. And even if I do go back in my journal and I make a mistake, when I'm not intuitive writing, when I'm journaling, I've made the practice of, if I've made a mistake, I put a heart around it and I embrace my mistakes, because our journals don't have to be perfect. I used to be that person that would rip out the page and rip out the page and rip out the page. And then I would never journal because I was just ripping it all out.
Yep. And then you're like, where'd all my journal go? Crap.
Yep. So
I ripped all of it out.
Yes, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just write and embrace your mind.